Hey guys, it's Bailey and welcome back to the channel for what is going to be a quick review of Mally Beauty's Nude Attitude eyeshadow palette. I am getting to try this from Octoly. For those of you who aren't familiar, I will put a link to octoly.com, it's a website, in the info bar below. But basically it's just a way for content creators to connect with brands, for the opportunity to try products they might want to share their thoughts on their YouTube channel. I think it's exclusive to people with YouTube channels, but I am not sure. Like I said, I'll link it down below if you want to check it out. Anywho, this guy contains 12 eyeshadows and retails for $35 a piece. As you might guess, with a name like Nude Attitude, oh, it also includes a double-ended brush. Here is the slot for it here, and it does have a good size mirror. It's practical. I used it to apply the look that I'm wearing today, so it's not as big as I would like. It doesn't take up like the entire size of this, but it's good size, along with that dual-ended brush. One side is kind of a fluffy all-purpose shader for the lid, but I also used it to apply my crease shade today. And then you have more of a detail brush that I used to not only pack on the pigment to the outer corner, but also smudge the shadow that I'm wearing today along my lower lash line. The brush itself is a really nice quality. It's definitely not a throwaway that they just put in here for some, superficial added value. It really does the trick. But more about the shadows. Like I was saying before, as you might have guessed from a name that has nude anywhere in the title, it is pretty neutral heavy. However, I do want to point out that there are some really nice, what would we call the pops of color? I don't know, standout shades, I would say. Namely like this kind of cranberry or plum leaning claret. And then there is this kind of strong silvery gray slate shade. But really when you look at them in the context of the whole palette, they're not super big outliers, but it's not like kind of a strict taupey browns or greigey neutrals. There are some kind of pops of interest within this palette. Speaking of, as far as the shade range goes, it has a pretty good mix of cool and somewhat warm. I wouldn't say it's entirely cool, but then you have shades over here that's like Terra Rosa or Russet down here. This is kind of a warmer leaning plum that I was just talking about. And then there's also a great mix of textures here. Everything from this Terra Rosa actually has kind of a micro glitter in it, whereas there are some satiny shimmer shades. Oh, Cafe au Lait down here, this taupe shade, is a pretty true satin, whereas something like Sand that I'm wearing on my lid today is a really strong shimmer. But then you also have your staple black, matte black carbon, matte cream, tawny that I wore in my crease. It's a good solid matte camel, and then chestnut, which is a matte deep chocolate brown, and pretty much everything in between. So overall, I would say the shade selection is really nice, especially if you do like to stick close to home with your neutrals, but you don't mind venturing out on occasion with, say, a cranberry or a slate or a steel or something like that. This Sand is kind of a golden brown as opposed to just your average champagne-y sandy brown. So I do think this palette adds a little bit of interest to the typical nude, naked, neutral palette selection out there. The formula is surprisingly dry. I say surprisingly because, it's not that I haven't experienced a dry eyeshadow, but despite how dry they are, and I think you can see when I put my brush, I'll give you a close-up here of me putting a brush in a shadow shade, it kicks up a lot of product, but if you tap it off, they apply with a lot of pigmentation and not a lot of fallout. And I can't think of an eyeshadow formula that is this dry to the touch that doesn't have a lot of fallout. You see in the demo that I will be showing here, I'm wearing my foundation as I'm applying these shadows, and typically that would be a major no for me because I just don't want to have to deal with fallout. But I'm working with darker shades here, and even in doing so, you don't see any fallout in my under eye area. So as odd as it may be, it is a drier formula, like not nearly as buttery as something like the Lorac Pro palettes by comparison, but at the same time, I don't experience a lot of fallout as a result and no compromise on the pigmentation. You can see these are really easily buildable for some really intense pigment. Overall, I would have to recommend this palette. I do think it kind of deviates from the average naked or nude, like I mentioned before, because it has those little colorful interests inside. And it's an awesome value at 6 shadows and 35 bucks. I do feel like you're getting your money's worth. However, I do want to mention that for as unique as it is, I combed through my collection to make sure there was nothing else out there because I think we all know, nude, naked, neutral has been exhausted in the eye palette vocabulary. So I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something similar out there, and it turns out there is something somewhat similar. So similar that I don't know that you'll want to run out and go buy this in the event you own the palette that I'm about to talk about, and it is the Balm's Nude eyeshadow palette. This is a longtime favorite. It's absolutely beautiful, but I remember picking it up and loving it for all the same reasons that I love this Mally palette. As you can see here, very similar color selection. You have a mixture of warm and cools, a mixture of matte, satin, shimmery textures, even down to the pop of this this is more of a burgundy, less of a plum from the Mally palette, and then you have this golden sandy shade here. You even have, Selfish is more of a taupe, less of a steel. Overall, I would say that the palette is very similar in color selection, but let me see if I can hold the two up side by side. You can see there are some distinct differences. Like I said, namely this bluey steel right here can't be found in the Nude, but there are some similarities that can't be ignored. Like I said, they're not exact dupes, but I do think you will find a lot of similar shadows between the two, so in the event you own one, I don't know that I would recommend running out to go buy the other as a must-have. Only because even if you aren't going to get identical looks, I do think you're going to get or you could create very similar looks from one palette to the next. So that's it from me. Really hope you guys enjoyed hearing a little bit more about the Nude Attitude eyeshadow palette from Mally. I'd love to hear if you guys have tried it, what you think about it in the comments below. But besides that, thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.